We gave your room to Bailey, sweetheart. It just makes more sense this way since you're never here anymore. Mom's voice on the phone was bright and casual, like she was telling me she'd rearranged the living room furniture, not that she'd erased my entire childhood. I was 19 years old, standing in my dorm room at State University with my phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I'd just heard. Bailey, my sister Ashley's golden retriever. They'd given my bedroom to a dog. I'd been at college for exactly 6 weeks, barely through my first round of midterms in my computer science program, and my room was already gone. Not packed up or turned into storage or converted into a guest room, though even those would have stung. No, they'd given it to my 26-year-old sister's dog. "What do you mean you gave it to Bailey?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how young. I was trying so hard to sound mature and independent here at college, but one phone call from home and I was 12 again, trying to understand why I never quite measured up. Well, Ashley's been staying with us more often now that she and Brett bought the house 2 streets over, and she likes to bring Bailey when she visits, and the poor thing was sleeping in the kitchen, and your room was just sitting there empty. Mom said it like it was the most logical thing in the world, like I should have suggested it myself. Ashley had the most wonderful idea to turn it into a proper space for Bailey. We've been working on it for 3 weeks now. You should see it, Emma. It's absolutely adorable. 3 weeks. I'd been gone for 6 weeks and they'd waited 3 before deciding I didn't need a home to come back to. I sat down on my dorm bed, the thin mattress creaking under me, and stared at the cinder block wall with its peeling paint. "But that's my room," I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I knew how pointless they were. This was the pattern, had always been the pattern. Ashley was the golden child, 7 years older, beautiful and charming, and perpetually the center of my parents' universe. I was the afterthought, the unexpected second daughter who never quite fit into the family narrative they'd already written. "Oh, honey, don't be dramatic," Mom said, and I could hear that edge creeping into her voice, the one that meant I was being difficult, being unreasonable, being too sensitive. "You're not even using it. You're at college now. You're an adult. Adults don't need their childhood bedrooms sitting empty like shrines." But Ashley still had her room, even though she'd moved out 8 years ago when she went to college. Ashley's room was exactly as she'd left it, her cheerleading trophies still on the shelves, her homecoming queen photos still on the walls. That room was a shrine. Mine had lasted 6 weeks. Before continuing the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers to be able to bring you stories like this every day. For you, it's just a click, but for me, it means a lot. My room had been small, tucked at the end of the upstairs hallway with a window that looked out over the backyard maple tree that turned brilliant orange every October. I'd chosen pale blue paint for the walls when I was 14, had spent an entire weekend with Dad carefully taping the edges and rolling on 2 coats, and I'd hung string lights along the ceiling that made the whole space feel like something magical when I turned off the overhead light at night. My desk had been positioned under that window, where I'd spent countless hours doing homework and teaching myself to code through free online courses because the high school didn't offer computer science classes. My bookshelf had held everything from childhood favorites I couldn't bear to part with to the advanced programming textbooks I'd bought used on Amazon with money from my part-time job at the library. That room had been my sanctuary, the one place in the house that was completely mine, where I could close the door and exist without constantly measuring myself against Ashley's perfection. And now it was gone, converted into a luxury suite for a dog, and Mom was still talking, her voice bright with an enthusiasm I rarely heard directed at anything involving me. "Ashley found the most gorgeous custom dog bed, Emma. It's like a miniature 4-poster with these beautiful carved posts. Cost about $800. But it's an investment piece, really. And we had heated floors installed because Bailey gets cold in the winter. You know how sensitive golden retrievers are. And there's a whole grooming station built into what used to be your closet, with a professional-grade sink and one of those fancy dryers." I was doing the math in my head even as she talked, the numbers adding up to more than I'd spent on my entire first semester of textbooks, more than my parents had contributed to my college expenses, which was exactly nothing because they'd told me my scholarship covered tuition, so I should be grateful and figure out the rest myself. There's even a little chandelier, Mom continued, and I could hear the smile in her voice, the pride, and something in my chest cracked a little wider. Ashley picked it out. It's crystal, very elegant, and we painted the walls this warm cream color and put in crown molding, which we never got around to doing when it was your room, but it just seemed worth it now to do it right. When it was my room, it hadn't been worth crown molding or heated floors or $800 furniture. When it was my room, I'd gotten hand-me-down furniture from Ashley's various redecorating phases and been told we were on a budget when I'd asked for a new desk chair after mine broke, and I'd duct-taped it back together. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out strange and tight, "where am I supposed to stay when I come home for Thanksgiving?" There was a pause, just a beat, and then her laugh, light and dismissive. "Oh, Emma, don't be silly. You can sleep on the couch in the den. It pulls out. It's perfectly comfortable. Besides, you're only here for a few days at a time now anyway. It's not like you need a whole room just sitting empty 11 months of the year." In the background, I heard Ashley's voice, that familiar mocking lilt. Is she seriously upset about this? And then Ashley's laugh, the same laugh that had soundtracked so many moments of my childhood when I was the punchline of a joke I didn't understand. "It's just a room, Emma," Mom said again. And I realized she genuinely didn't understand why I wasn't celebrating this with her, why I wasn't cooing over the photos she was probably about to text me of Bailey's adorable new space. "You're not even using it, sweetheart. You're building your own life now. Isn't that what matters?" What matters, I thought as I ended the call, and sat in the silence of my dorm room with my phone still warm in my hand. Building my own life. That was what they'd always told me mattered when it came to things I wanted, things that involved them making an effort or spending money or paying attention. But when it came to Ashley, suddenly family mattered, tradition mattered, being there mattered. Ashley's wedding had been in June 2 years ago, 3 months after I'd finished my junior year of high school, and I'd spent weeks assuming I'd be a bridesmaid because I was her sister, her only sister. But the bridal party was announced at a family dinner, and it was 6 of Ashley's friends from college and her book club, and not me. I'd sat there at the table with my fork halfway to my mouth when Mom read the list, and when she finished, I'd waited for my name, and there was just silence. And then Ashley had said, "Emma, you'll be so cute sitting in the family pew. We'll get you a special corsage." Like I was a grandmother or a child, not her 19-year-old sister. I'd said okay because what else was I supposed to say? And later, when I'd carefully asked Mom if maybe there was a reason I wasn't included, she'd sighed that tired sigh that meant I was creating problems where none existed, and said Ashley wanted her bridal party to be people she was close to. And wasn't I being a little selfish making Ashley's wedding about me? The wedding itself had cost $43,000. I knew because I'd heard Mom on the phone with her sister, my Aunt Carol, talking about how they'd contributed $15,000, and it was worth every penny to see Ashley so happy. $15,000 for Ashley's perfect day. When I'd gotten my acceptance letter to State University with a full academic scholarship, Mom had said congratulations and then immediately started talking about how Ashley and Brett were looking at houses. My high school graduation was on May 28th, 2 years ago, at 7 in the evening, and I was giving the salutatorian speech because I'd missed valedictorian by .03 of a grade point average, and I'd worked so hard for 4 years. And the morning of graduation, Mom had suddenly remembered that Bailey had a vet appointment at 6:30 for some routine checkup that absolutely couldn't be rescheduled, even though it had been scheduled for 3 weeks, and graduation had been on the calendar for months. Ashley needed Mom to come with her because she got anxious at the vet, apparently, and Dad had to work late, a shift he'd picked up that very day, and so I'd given my speech to a nearly full auditorium of families, and my family wasn't there. My English teacher, Mrs. Chen, had noticed, had asked me afterward if everything was okay, and I'd lied and said they'd had an emergency, because saying my sister's dog had a checkup sounded insane, sounded like something I must have been exaggerating. They'd made it home by 9:30, and Mom had said they'd tried their best. And Ashley had given me a card with $50 in it, like that made up for not caring enough to move a routine appointment. When Ashley had bought her house last year, the three-bedroom Craftsman 2 streets over from my parents for $320,000. There had been a family party, a celebration, champagne, and a cake from the expensive bakery downtown, and everyone had toured the house and talked about what a smart investment it was and how proud they were of Ashley and Brett for being such responsible adults. I'd been 17, still in high school, and I'd stood in Ashley's empty living room and felt invisible. My first semester at State University passed in a strange blur of freedom and discovery, the 3-hour distance from home feeling like crossing into a different country where I could be someone other than the disappointing younger sister who never quite measured up. I was majoring in computer science, one of only 7 women in most of my classes, and I loved it in a way I'd never loved anything before. The clean logic of code, and the satisfaction of solving problems that had actual right answers instead of the moving target of my family's approval. I'd made friends, joined the Women in Tech Club, spent long nights in the computer lab working on projects with other students who got excited about the same things I did, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then, mid-November arrived, and Mom called on a Tuesday evening while I was debugging a particularly frustrating assignment. "So, Thanksgiving," she said without preamble. "Dinner's at 3 like always. I'm making the turkey, and Ashley's bringing her sweet potato casserole. Dad will pick you up Wednesday afternoon. What time is your last class?" I stared at my laptop screen, at the lines of code that suddenly seemed much more appealing than the thought of going home, of sleeping on the pull-out couch in the den while Bailey luxuriated in my former room down the hall. "Actually, Mom, I don't think I can make it this year," I heard myself say, and the words felt dangerous and thrilling at the same time. "I have a huge project due the Monday after Thanksgiving, and I really need to use the break to work on it." The silence on the other end lasted just long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped, and then Mom's voice came back irritated and tight. "Emma, it's Thanksgiving. It's family. Surely your professors don't expect you to miss Thanksgiving for schoolwork." I could have explained that the project actually wasn't due until the following Friday, that I was lying, that I just didn't want to come home to a house where a dog mattered more than I did, but instead, I said something about the computer science program being very demanding, and I was sorry, but I'd make it home for Christmas. Mom made a noise that suggested she didn't believe me, but wasn't willing to push it, told me I was making a mistake, and then suddenly, Ashley was on the line, her voice dripping with that familiar condescension. "Let me guess, you're still being all sensitive about the room thing?" she said, and I could picture her rolling her eyes, examining her manicured nails, performing her exasperation for Mom's benefit. "It's been 2 months, Emma. Bailey needed a proper space and you literally never use it. Are you really going to skip Thanksgiving and be dramatic about this?" Something shifted in me then, some fundamental understanding clicking into place like a piece of code finally compiling correctly. I didn't want to go back to that house. I didn't want to sit at that table and be invisible while Ashley held court and Mom hung on her every word, and Dad read the paper and pretended not to notice the dynamic that had shaped my entire childhood. I didn't want to perform gratitude for people who had given a dog the room that used to be mine. "I'm not being dramatic," I said quietly. "I'm just busy with school, but you guys have a great Thanksgiving," and I ended the call before Ashley could respond. I sat there in my dorm room with my phone dark in my hand and realized I was smiling. Realized I felt lighter than I had in months. Realized that for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself over the endless, impossible task of trying to matter to people who had already decided I didn't. Christmas break approached like a storm I could see building on the horizon, and the pressure started in early December with Mom's calls increasing in frequency and intensity, each one a variation on the same theme of expectation and guilt. "You're coming home for Christmas, of course," she said on December 3rd, not a question but a statement of assumed compliance. "We'll have the whole family together. Ashley and Brett are hosting Christmas Eve, and we're doing Christmas morning at our house like always." I'd made a non-committal sound and said I'd let her know, which had been a mistake because it gave her an opening to call back 2 days later, then 3 days after that, each conversation growing more irritated as I continued to deflect. By December 10th, I'd made my decision, and I'd found it posted on the Student Life Board in the Union, a call for volunteers at the campus interfaith shelter over winter break, and I'd signed up for December 23rd through December 26th, 3 12-hour shifts helping serve meals and organize donations, and when I called Mom to tell her I wouldn't be coming home, her voice had gone cold and sharp. "You're choosing to serve meals to strangers instead of spending Christmas with your family," she'd said. And I'd explained that some of us didn't go home for the holidays, and someone needed to help. But she'd already decided I was doing this to hurt her, to punish them, and she'd hung up after telling me I was being incredibly selfish and hurtful. The voicemails started that evening, 4 of them by the time I woke up the next morning. Mom's voice progressing from disappointed to angry, to crying about how she'd raised me better than this and didn't understand when I'd become so cold. Dad sent a text on December 12th, just 7 words that somehow contained years of family dynamics. "Your mother is hurt. Please reconsider." I didn't respond because what was there to say? That Mom was hurt I wouldn't come home and sleep on a pull-out couch while Bailey enjoyed my bedroom? That I was supposed to care about her hurt feelings when she'd never once considered mine? My roommate Jordan had been watching this unfold from her desk across our dorm room, and on December 13th, after I'd listened to another voicemail and then deleted it, she'd finally asked, "Is your family always like this?" I'd immediately said no, they were fine. It was just complicated, the automatic defense rising up before I'd even thought about it. But Jordan had given me this look that was gentle and knowing and sad all at once. "Emma, you've been stressed about going home since Thanksgiving," she said quietly. "And every time your mom calls you, get this look on your face like you're bracing for something, and that's not normal. That's not how family is supposed to make you feel." I'd opened my mouth to defend them again, to explain that every family had their issues, but instead I'd found myself telling her about the room, about Bailey's luxury dog suite with its heated floors and custom furniture, and once I started talking, I couldn't seem to stop. The whole story spilling out about Ashley's wedding and my excluded graduation, and the pattern of being overlooked that had been my entire life. Jordan had listened without interrupting, and when I'd finally finished, she'd been quiet for a moment before saying, "You know that's not okay, right? Like, none of that is normal or acceptable." And hearing someone say it out loud, hearing that validation from an outside perspective, had cracked something open inside me that I hadn't known was sealed shut. Spring semester started in mid-January, and I threw myself into it with an intensity that surprised even me, taking 18 credit hours including advanced data structures and web development, while also landing a part-time coding job at a local startup called DevStream that paid $15 an hour for 10 hours a week, which meant I was making actual money for the first time in my life, not just the pittance from my work-study position shelving library books. I was excelling in ways I'd never imagined possible, getting my first 4.0 semester, building actual applications that worked, making friends with other developers who spoke my language and understood my passion, and constructing a life that felt genuinely mine in a way nothing ever had before. Mom's calls became less frequent through February and March, dropping from twice a week to maybe once every 10 days, and when she did call, her tone had shifted from hurt to annoyed, this edge of irritation that suggested my absence was more inconvenient than painful. "Why are you being like this?" she asked in late February, and I didn't have an answer that she'd want to hear, so I just said I was busy with school and work, which was true, but not the whole truth. I'd started setting boundaries without really naming them as such, keeping our calls short, giving vague answers about my schedule, declining to engage when she brought up Ashley, or complained about how I never asked about Bailey anymore, and I could feel her frustration building with each conversation that didn't go the way she wanted. Then in early March, my cousin Rachel texted me screenshots from the family group chat, the one I'd muted back in December and never unmuted, and I sat in the library staring at my phone screen reading messages about me like I was reading about a stranger. Emma has really changed and not in a good way, Mom had written on March 8th. She's become so distant and difficult. I don't know what that college is teaching her, but it's certainly not family values. Ashley had responded with, "She's always been weird, but now she's being actively rude, like we're supposed to beg her to be part of this family." My Aunt Jennifer, Dad's sister, had written, "Maybe give her some space, she's 19 and figuring things out," which had earned her a paragraph from Mom about how space was one thing, but Emma's attitude problem was another. I'd read through all of it twice, Rachel's message at the top saying, "Thought you should see this. It's been going on for weeks." And I'd felt this strange disconnect, like they were discussing someone who had wronged them terribly, instead of a daughter and sister who had simply stopped accepting crumbs and calling it a feast. I'd thanked Rachel for the heads up, and then I'd gone back to the code I'd been debugging, and I'd realized that their assessment of me as difficult and changed was actually completely accurate. I had changed, I had become difficult, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to apologize for it. Summer arrived with final exams in early May, and then suddenly the semester was over, and everyone was scattering to their hometowns and summer plans. But I wasn't going home because I'd applied for and been accepted to a software development internship at a tech startup called Innovate Labs in the city. 45 minutes from campus by train, and I'd found a sublet through a graduate student who was doing field research in Iceland for 3 months, a tiny studio apartment for $600 a month that I could just barely afford with my internship stipend of $20 an hour for 40 hours a week. When I'd called Mom in late April to tell her about the internship, her voice had gone immediately cold and tight. That particular tone that meant I'd disappointed her again, but she was going to try to sound reasonable about it. "You're not coming home for the summer?" she'd asked. And I'd explained that this was an incredible opportunity, that Innovate Labs was a growing company working on educational technology, and having this on my resume would be huge for my career, but she'd cut me off mid-sentence. "Family comes first, Emma," she'd said. "Or at least it's supposed to, but apparently you have different priorities now." I'd felt the familiar guilt rising up, that old instinct to apologize and backtrack and make myself smaller to fit into the space they'd carved out for me. But then I'd thought about Bailey sleeping in my bedroom on a custom dog bed that cost more than my entire first semester of textbooks, and I'd heard myself say, "I have to do what's best for my future, Mom." And she'd made this disgusted sound and hung up without saying goodbye. But the truth was that family had never really included me. Not in any way that mattered. Not in any way that suggested my presence or absence made a tangible difference in their lives beyond giving them someone to overlook and dismiss. I'd moved into the sublet on May 20th, taking the train with 2 suitcases and my laptop, and when I'd unlocked the door to that tiny studio with its narrow kitchen and futon couch and single window overlooking a parking lot, I'd felt something I'd never quite experienced before, a sense of complete freedom that was almost frightening in its intensity. There was no one to monitor my mood or adjust my behavior around, no one whose expectations I needed to manage, no one who would make passive-aggressive comments about my choices or compare me unfavorably to my golden child sister. I could eat cereal for dinner, or stay up until 3 in the morning coding, or play music as loud as I wanted. And the simplicity of being able to exist without constantly making myself small and quiet and unobtrusive was so startling that I'd actually cried that first night, sitting on the futon in the dark, realizing that I'd spent 19 years walking on eggshells in my own home, and I'd thought that was just what family was. The internship at Innovate Labs turned out to be one of those rare, perfect fit situations where my skills aligned exactly with what they needed, and my supervisor, Marcus Chen, a 32-year-old senior developer who'd worked at Google before joining the startup, saw potential in me that I was only beginning to recognize in myself. By the end of June, he'd pulled me into a meeting with the CEO and offered me the position of project lead for a client app they were developing for a regional school district, an educational platform that would help teachers track student progress and communicate with parents. And I'd sat there in that glass-walled conference room, thinking that 6 months ago, I'd been the forgotten daughter whose bedroom was worth less than a dog kennel, and now I was being trusted with actual responsibility on a real product that real people would use. The app work consumed my July and most of August in the best possible way. 12-hour days that didn't feel like work because I was learning and building and solving problems. And Marcus kept telling me I had an instinct for clean code that usually took developers years to develop. Meanwhile, Mom's calls had shifted from annoyed to pure guilt trip, her voice taking on this martyred quality that I recognized from a lifetime of being on the receiving end of it. "I just don't understand what we did to deserve this treatment," she said in mid-July. "Your sister asks about you all the time, and I have to tell her that you're too busy for your own family." I'd bitten back the response that Ashley had never once actually called or texted me directly, that her asking about me was probably more like complaining about my absence, but I'd just said I was working on an important project and kept the call to under 5 minutes. Then in early August, my cousin Rachel texted me again, this time saying, "Ashley is freaking out that you're not coming home. I think she actually misses having you around to make herself feel better in comparison." And I'd stared at that message for a long time, realizing that Rachel had articulated something I'd always known, but never named, that my role in the family had been to make Ashley look good by comparison. To be the forgettable one so she could be the memorable one. Dad finally called on August 15th, a Saturday afternoon when I was debugging a particularly frustrating section of code, and his approach was softer than Mom's, more reasonable sounding, which somehow made it worse. "Your mother really misses you, Emma," he said. "She doesn't say it right, but she does. And maybe you could come home for a weekend before school starts?" I'd saved my code and closed my laptop and asked the question I'd been holding on to for months. "Dad, does it bother you at all that Bailey still has my room?" There was a long silence, so long I thought the call had dropped, and then he said, "That's not really the point, is it?" And I'd felt something cold and final settle in my chest because yes, actually, that was exactly the point. That was the entire point, and the fact that he couldn't or wouldn't see it told me everything I needed to know. "I have to get back to work," I'd said, and he'd sighed this long-suffering sigh and said, "You've really changed, Emma." And I'd said, "Yes, I have," and hung up before he could say anything else that would require me to explain why changing was the best thing I'd ever done. Sophomore year began in late August, and I moved into my new position as resident assistant on the third floor of Henderson Hall, which meant I had a single room at the end of the corridor and didn't have to pay the $7,800 for housing. Plus, I received a monthly stipend of $300 for my RA duties. And for the first time in my life, I was completely financially independent from my parents. Not that they'd been contributing much anyway, but now I didn't need to even consider asking them for anything. The educational app I'd worked on all summer at Innovate Labs launched in mid-September for the school district's fall rollout, and Marcus sent me a message saying the client was thrilled with the product and that he'd put my name on the development credits. And suddenly, I had this tangible thing I could point to on my resume, actual professional experience that tech companies cared about. And I started getting emails from recruiters at places like Amazon and Microsoft, asking if I'd be interested in internship interviews for next summer. My life had momentum now, this forward trajectory that I'd built entirely myself, and every achievement felt like evidence that I'd been right to step away from a family that had never seen my value. Then on October 3rd, Ashley posted in the family group chat, the one I'd muted months ago but occasionally checked out of morbid curiosity, a photo of a positive pregnancy test with about 15 exclamation points, and the message, "We're pregnant!" And the chat immediately exploded with congratulations from mom and dad and aunts and uncles and cousins, everyone performing their excitement in real time with crying emojis and heart emojis and questions about due dates and gender predictions. I typed a simple, "Congratulations, Ashley, that's wonderful news," because whatever my feelings about my sister, I could still be a decent person about a pregnancy, and then I went back to studying for my data structures exam. 2 hours later, my phone rang, and it was Mom, her voice pitched high with that performative excitement that I recognized as her public-facing emotion, the one she used when other people might be listening or when she wanted to seem like a caring mother. "Emma, did you see Ashley's news? You're going to be an aunt," she said, and I confirmed that yes, I'd seen the announcement and had congratulated Ashley in the group chat. "We're planning the baby shower for January," Mom continued, "probably the third weekend, and obviously you'll come home for that. It's going to be at Ashley's house. Well, at her house for now. She and David are talking about buying something bigger now that they're starting a family." There it was. The assumption that I would simply rearrange my life for Ashley's milestone. The expectation that of course I would come home because this was important, never mind that nothing in my life had ever been treated as important enough to warrant their attention. "I'll have to check my schedule," I said carefully. "Second semester starts mid-January, and I might have training for my RA position." Mom's voice cooled immediately, that familiar shift from sweet to sharp that happened whenever I didn't immediately comply. "You'll come home for the baby shower, right?" she asked. And it wasn't really a question. It was a command dressed up in question format, and I felt something in me that had been bending for 20 years finally lock into place and refuse to bend anymore. I checked my schedule, and the baby shower fell on January 19th, the same weekend as the regional collegiate programming competition that my team had been preparing for since October. A competition that offered a $25,000 prize for the winning team and would have representatives from major tech companies in attendance as recruiters. And I had to make a choice between supporting Ashley at an event where I'd likely be ignored or dismissed anyway, and pursuing something that could genuinely impact my career and education. I called Mom back 3 days later and told her I couldn't make the baby shower because I had a major presentation for a programming competition that weekend, and the explosion on the other end of the phone was immediate and volcanic. "Your sister is having a baby and you care more about school?" she shouted, her voice sharp enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event, Emma. Ashley's first baby, and you're going to miss it for some computer thing?" The irony wasn't lost on me that my achievements had never been once-in-a-lifetime events worthy of attention, that my scholarship hadn't mattered and my app launch hadn't mattered and my dean's list grades hadn't mattered, but I was expected to drop everything for Ashley's milestone, to rearrange my life and sacrifice my opportunities because her moments were inherently more valuable than mine. "It's a national competition, Mom," I said, keeping my voice level, "and I'm team captain. I can't just not show up." She made a sound of disgust and said, "You've become so selfish. I don't even know who you are anymore." And then she hung up without saying goodbye. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing with text messages from family members, clearly part of a coordinated campaign orchestrated by Mom. Aunt Linda sent, "Really disappointed in your priorities, Emma." Uncle Tom wrote, "Family should come first. Think about what you're doing." Ashley herself sent a long message about how hurt she was that her only sister didn't care enough to celebrate her baby, how she'd always supported me even though I'd never appreciated it, how this just proved that I thought I was better than everyone now that I was in college. I sat on my residence hall bed reading these messages and felt something shift from hurt to clarity, seeing the manipulation for what it was, recognizing that they were trying to use guilt and shame to control me the way they always had. I blocked Aunt Linda and Uncle Tom and 3 cousins who'd sent similar messages. I kept Dad's number active even though he hadn't reached out, And I kept my Aunt Jennifer, who'd always been kind to me, and had sent a message saying, "Do what's right for you, honey." Everyone else could stay blocked. I was done letting people who'd never valued me make me feel guilty for valuing myself. Junior year started with intensity that matched my ambition. 4 advanced computer science courses, plus my RA responsibilities, plus the continuation of our programming competition team that had been meeting twice a week since the previous spring. And our team of 5 students had been working on optimization algorithms and collaborative coding strategies, because we weren't content with just competing at regionals anymore. We were aiming for the ACM International Collegiate Programming Competition Nationals in March. We spent February practicing with past competition problems, running mock competitions under time pressure, and our faculty advisor, Dr. Chen, said we had a legitimate shot at placing in the top 10 nationally if we kept up this level of preparation. The national competition was held in Atlanta on March 23rd, and we flew out 2 days early. And I remember the feeling of walking into that conference center and seeing teams from MIT and Stanford and Carnegie Mellon, all these students from prestigious programs, and wondering if a state school team like ours could actually compete at this level. The competition was 8 hours of intense problem solving, 3 team members working together on 12 algorithm problems of increasing difficulty, and we fell into this flow state where Jordan was handling the graph theory problems, and Marcus was managing the dynamic programming challenges, and I was debugging and optimizing our solutions. And when they announced results that evening, we'd placed 7th nationally and won $12,500 each as our share of the $50,000 prize. Plus, we'd all received recruitment interest from 6 different tech companies, including Google and Facebook, who had representatives at the competition specifically looking for talent. I was shaking when they handed me the oversized check for the photo, this physical proof that I was actually good at something, that all those hours I'd spent coding while my family dismissed my interests had built into genuine expertise that people valued. I posted one photo on Instagram that night, just the team holding our checks with a simple caption, 7th place nationals, ACM ICPC, because I wasn't trying to brag. I just wanted to document this moment that felt like everything shifting into place. Mom didn't like or comment on the post. Ashley didn't acknowledge it. But 2 days after I got back to campus, my phone rang with a number I almost didn't recognize because we talked so rarely. And it was Grandma Helen, my dad's mother, who lived in Arizona, and who I'd seen maybe once a year at Christmas, when I still went home for holidays. "Emma, I saw your post about that computer competition," she said, her voice warm with genuine excitement. $12,000 and 7th in the whole country. Honey, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. I felt something crack open in my chest, this unexpected validation from someone in my family, and I told her about the competition and the companies that wanted to interview me and the job offers that were starting to come in for after graduation. "Your father told me you're doing well in school, but he didn't mention anything like this," Grandma said. And then, after a pause, "Emma, I want you to know I've noticed how your mother treats you differently than Ashley. I've noticed it for years, and I'm sorry I never said anything. I thought it wasn't my place to interfere. But watching you build this life for yourself, I think you're doing exactly what you need to do." We talked for 40 minutes, and when we hung up, I sat in my RA room and cried. Not from sadness, but from the relief of having someone from my family finally acknowledge that I wasn't crazy, that the dismissal and overlooking had been real and visible and wrong. Ashley's baby was born on April 7th, a Tuesday afternoon, and I found out not from a phone call or a personal text, but from a post in the family group chat that I'd muted months ago, but never actually left. A photo of Ashley in a hospital bed holding a tiny pink-wrapped bundle with Mom beaming beside her, and the caption, "Welcome to the world, baby Olivia. 7 tell subs, 3 Oz. Everyone is healthy and happy." I screenshot the post and sent Ashley a direct text saying, "Congratulations, she's beautiful. Wishing you all the best." And then I went to Target that evening and bought a baby gift set. One of those organic cotton newborn outfits with matching blankets and a stuffed giraffe. Spent about $80 on it and had it shipped directly to Mom's address with a card that said, "For Olivia, with love from Aunt Emma." I thought that was appropriate, that I'd acknowledged the birth and sent a thoughtful gift and fulfilled my obligation as a sister, but apparently my failure to drop everything and rush to the hospital was an unforgivable offense, because 2 days later, Mom called me at 8 in the morning, a Thursday, when I had an operating systems midterm at 10 and a crucial interview with a recruiter from a Silicon Valley company at 2, and she was crying before I even said hello. "I cannot believe you didn't come to the hospital," she said, her voice thick with tears that I suspected were more angry than sad. "Your sister had a baby, your first niece, and you couldn't even be bothered to visit. Do you have any idea how much you hurt Ashley? How much you hurt all of us?" I was sitting at my desk with my operating systems notes spread out in front of me, trying to cram 3 chapters of material on process synchronization into my brain before the exam, and I could feel the familiar guilt trying to take root in my chest. But this time it met resistance. This time I was too tired and too busy and too done with this pattern to let it grow. "I sent a gift, Mom," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I have midterms this week. I couldn't just leave." She made a sound of disgust and said, "You always have an excuse, Emma. Always something more important than your family. Do you even care about anyone but yourself?" And I felt something snap inside me. Some final thread of patience that had been fraying for 3 years. "I learned family values from you, Mom," I said, and my voice was steady and cold, and nothing like the uncertain girl who'd called home freshman year to hear about the dog getting her bedroom. Apparently my room was worth less than a dog kennel, so I guess I understand exactly how much I matter to this family. There was a moment of absolute silence on the other end of the line, a shocked pause like she couldn't believe I'd actually said it out loud. And then she sputtered something that might have been the start of a defense or an attack, but I didn't wait to find out because I said, "I have to go study now," and I hung up before she could respond. Senior year started in September with the kind of confidence I'd never felt before, because I had a standing job offer from TechCore Industries in San Francisco, starting at $95,000 base salary, plus a $20,000 signing bonus, plus stock options. And I was on track to graduate summa cum laude in May with a 3.9 GPA and enough industry connections that I'd turned down 4 other job offers to accept TechCore's. I was taking my final required courses and working as head RA for my residence hall and mentoring 2 freshman computer science students. And my life felt full and purposeful in a way it never had when I was trying to win approval from people who would never give it. Mom called in early March, a Saturday afternoon when I was meal prepping for the week and half listening to a podcast about women in tech, and her voice had that artificially bright tone that meant she wanted something. "Emma, your graduation is May 18th, right?" she said. And I confirmed it was, and she continued without pausing. "We'll be there, of course. Your father and I wouldn't miss it. And Ashley wants to bring the baby. Olivia will be just over a year old by then, and she's walking now. It'll be so nice for the family to see you finally." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. This assumption that they'd be there taking up space at my achievement after years of dismissing every milestone I'd reached. And I realized with sudden clarity that they wanted to attend now because graduation was public, because it was a ceremony where other people would see them, where they could perform the role of proud, supportive parents, and no one in the audience would know they'd spent 4 years barely acknowledging my existence. I thought about the programming competition they'd ignored, and the Dean's List semesters they'd never congratulated me for, and the scholarship awards they'd never asked about. And I thought about that phone call freshman year, when Mom told me my childhood bedroom was now a luxury suite for Ashley's dog, and I made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "Actually, Mom, the ticket allocation is really limited," I said, keeping my voice casual and polite. "Each graduate only gets 4 tickets, and I've already promised mine to Jordan's family. They've been really supportive throughout college. They basically adopted me as a bonus daughter, so they're coming to watch me walk. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she might have hung up, and then Mom's voice came back sharp and disbelieving. You're giving your graduation tickets to your roommate's family instead of your own parents? And I said yes, that's exactly what I was doing. I was giving them to the people who'd actually supported me, who'd invited me to their Thanksgivings, and asked about my classes and celebrated my victories, the people who'd treated me like I mattered. Mom's reaction was nuclear. A level of fury I'd only witnessed a handful of times in my life, and never directed at me because I'd never dared to defy her so completely. She started yelling before I'd even finished my sentence about Jordan's family, her voice rising to a pitch that made me pull the phone away from my ear, saying, "How dare you exclude your own family from your graduation after everything we've done for you, after we paid for your childhood and raised you and supported you?" Which would have been laughable if it weren't so painfully disconnected from reality, because they hadn't paid for college, my scholarship and loans and part-time jobs had paid for college, and supporting me had apparently meant giving my bedroom to a dog. She went on for 5 straight minutes about my selfishness and my ingratitude and how I'd changed into someone she didn't recognize, someone cold and cruel and hateful, and I just let her talk because I knew nothing I said would matter. She wasn't actually listening to me or trying to understand my perspective. She was just angry that I'd stepped out of my assigned role as the accommodating daughter who absorbed mistreatment without complaint. When she finally ran out of steam, I said, "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mom," and hung up, and my hands were shaking, but I felt strangely calm, like I'd finally done something I should have done years ago. 20 minutes later, Ashley called, and she was furious in a different way, her voice sharp and nasty in that particular tone she used when she wanted to cut deep. And she said, "You're punishing us because you're jealous. That's what this is really about. You're jealous that I have a baby and a husband and a real life, and you're just some nerdy college kid who's going to end up alone with your computers." And something about the phrasing of it, the casual dismissal of everything I'd accomplished, made me laugh out loud. "I'm some nerdy college kid with a six-figure job offer starting in June," I said, keeping my voice perfectly pleasant and even. "I'm some nerdy college kid who's graduating summa cum laude and moving to San Francisco to work for a company you've definitely heard of. But sure, let's go with your version. I'm jealous of your life. Enjoy the dog's room, Ashley. I hope it brings you as much comfort as it clearly brought Mom to give it away." I hung up before she could respond, and I blocked her number immediately, just pressed the block contact button without hesitation or regret. Dad called 3 hours later, after dark, and his voice was quiet and tired in a way that almost made me feel guilty, except I was done feeling guilty for other people's choices. "You really not giving us tickets, Emma?" he asked. And I said yes, I really wasn't. And there was a long pause before he asked why, and I said, "Did you ever once stand up for me, Dad, in all these years? Did you ever once tell Mom she was wrong for how she treated me? Did you ever defend me or protect me, or make me feel like I mattered even half as much as Ashley?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, and then he said quietly, "That's what I thought." And I wasn't sure if he was agreeing with me or dismissing me, but either way I said, "I have to go," and I ended the call. Graduation day was May 18th, and it dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect spring morning that felt almost symbolic. And I woke up in my residence hall room at 6 a.m., even though the ceremony didn't start until 10, because I was too excited and nervous to sleep any longer. I put on my cap and gown over the white dress I'd bought specifically for this day, a simple fitted dress that cost more than I would have spent on myself 2 years ago, but now felt like an appropriate celebration of what I'd accomplished. And I looked at myself in the mirror and felt proud of the woman looking back at me. Someone who'd built a life through sheer determination and refusal to accept that she wasn't enough. Jordan's parents picked us both up at 8:30. Her mom taking approximately 200 photos before we even left the parking lot, her dad telling me for the third time that week how proud he was of me, and sitting in their car driving to the stadium, I felt this overwhelming gratitude for the family I'd chosen, the people who'd shown up for me consistently and genuinely for 4 years. The stadium was packed with graduates and families, thousands of people filling the seats in a sea of black robes and colored cords denoting various honors. And I found my place in the College of Engineering section, wearing the gold cords that marked me as summa cum laude, along with the silver cords for the honors program. When they called my name, Emma Catherine Morrison, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, summa cum laude. I walked across that stage and shook the dean's hand and accepted my diploma cover. And I heard Jordan's family screaming and cheering from their section loud enough that other graduates around me smiled. And I looked out at the crowd and saw Jordan's mom on her feet applauding, her dad filming everything on his phone, Jordan herself graduating in the liberal arts ceremony later that afternoon, but there anyway, to watch me walk. I saw my internship supervisor, Dr. Patel, sitting near the back. She'd driven 3 hours to be there and told me last week that watching her mentees graduate was one of her favorite parts of the job. And I saw Grandma in the accessible seating section, 82 years old and frail, but absolutely determined to witness this moment, wearing a purple dress and waving when she caught my eye. After the ceremony, there was a reception on the lawn outside the engineering building, tables with punch and cookies and little sandwiches, and I was surrounded by friends and professors and the people who'd actually been part of my journey. Dr. Patel introducing me to a colleague from another tech company who immediately handed me her card, Jordan's parents insisting on taking family-style photos with me in my regalia, Grandma holding both my hands and telling me that my grandfather would have been so proud. He'd always known I was brilliant. I stood there in the sunlight with my diploma in my hands, and people who genuinely cared about me all around. And I felt the full weight of what I'd accomplished, not just academically, but personally. The fact that I'd done all of this despite my family, without their support or encouragement, or even basic acknowledgement, and I'd still succeeded, still thrived, still become exactly who I wanted to be, and that realization felt more valuable than any degree. I moved to California on June 15th, driving cross-country in my used Honda Civic packed with everything I owned that mattered, which turned out to be less than I expected because I was starting fresh and most of my college furniture had been Jordan's anyway or bought secondhand. And I arrived in San Francisco on June 21st after 6 days of driving through landscapes that got progressively more beautiful and foreign. My apartment was in the Mission District, a one-bedroom that cost an absolutely insane $2,400 a month, but TechCore's relocation package covered the first 2 months, and my salary meant I could actually afford it. And standing in that empty apartment on my first night with just an air mattress and my laptop, I felt this profound sense of possibility, like my life was finally actually beginning at 22 years old. I'd been no contact with Mom and Ashley for exactly 2 months, since the day after graduation when Ashley had sent one final nasty text calling me a selfish bitch and I'd blocked her number permanently. And the silence from that side of my family was honestly peaceful in a way I hadn't expected. No more guilt trips or demands or casual cruelty disguised as concern. Dad sent occasional texts, brief things like, "Hope you're doing well," and "Congrats on the new job," that I sometimes answered with equally brief responses, keeping him at a distance, but not completely cut off, because part of me still hoped he might eventually understand what he'd allowed to happen. My first 2 months at TechCore were intense and exciting and overwhelming in the best way, learning their systems and meeting my team and working on actual products that millions of people would use. And I was good at it. My code was clean and efficient, and my ideas in meetings were taken seriously by senior developers who treated me like a colleague rather than a kid. I made friends with my coworkers, went to happy hours in the marina, explored the city on weekends, started dating casually, built a life that felt authentically mine for the first time ever. Then in late August, my cousin Rachel reached out, the same cousin who'd sent me screenshots of the family group chat years ago, and her message started with, "I thought you should know," which is never a good sign, and she told me that Ashley was getting divorced, that her husband had apparently been cheating for months and walked out in July, and Ashley had moved back in with mom and dad with the baby, who was now 8 months old, and apparently colicky and difficult, screaming constantly and not sleeping through the night. Rachel said the house was chaos. Mom was exhausted from dealing with both Ashley's emotional breakdowns and the crying baby. Ashley had no money because she'd been a stay-at-home mom and her husband was fighting her on support. And apparently, Ashley had asked about me multiple times, not because she missed me or felt bad about how she'd treated me, but because she'd said something to Mom about, "Emma probably has money now with her fancy job. Maybe she could help out." I read that message sitting in my beautiful apartment with my six-figure salary and my carefully built life. And I felt absolutely nothing, no sympathy or satisfaction or guilt, just a kind of distant observation that their lives had imploded while mine had flourished. And I texted Rachel back, thanking her for letting me know, but making it clear I had no intention of reaching out or getting involved. 6 months into my new job at TechCore, in December, I got promoted to senior developer with a raise that brought my salary to $110,000, and my manager told me during the review that my code quality and problem-solving skills were exceptional, and they were fast-tracking me for technical leadership roles, which felt surreal considering I was only 23 and had been in the industry less than a year. My life had settled into this comfortable rhythm that felt almost dreamlike compared to the chaos of my childhood, living in my sunny one-bedroom apartment that I'd decorated exactly how I wanted with plants on every surface and a proper desk setup for my home coding projects, dating a guy named Michael who worked in product design at a different tech company and was kind and thoughtful in ways I was still learning to accept as normal, spending weekends hiking in Marin or exploring new restaurants with coworkers who'd become genuine friends, building this rich, full existence that belonged entirely to me. I'd been completely no contact with Mom and Ashley since graduation, 7 months of blessed silence, and Dad's occasional texts had dwindled to maybe one every 3 weeks, brief check-ins that I responded to with equal brevity, keeping that connection open but minimal, because I still wasn't ready to forgive, but also wasn't ready to completely sever that tie. Then on December 10th, a Tuesday, I was in the middle of a code review when I got an email notification on my phone, and when I glanced at it during a break, I saw it was from my mother to my work email address, which meant she'd actively searched for it because I'd never given her that contact information, probably found it on TechCore's public directory or my LinkedIn profile. The subject line was, "We need to talk," and I felt my stomach drop even before I opened it. That old familiar anxiety response kicking in immediately, despite 7 months of therapy and boundary setting and building my own life. I waited until I got home that evening to actually read it, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on my couch and opened the email on my laptop. It was long, maybe 8 paragraphs, and it started with, "Emma, I know we haven't spoken in a while, and I understand you've been upset, but family is family, and we need to move past this." And I could already feel the manipulation in that framing, the way she positioned my completely justified boundaries as me being upset rather than responding to years of mistreatment. The email went on about how we've all made mistakes and no family is perfect, and holding grudges helps no one, never once specifically acknowledging what she'd actually done, just vague platitudes about forgiveness and moving forward. And then it got to the real point buried in paragraph 6. Ashley was really struggling with the divorce. The legal fees were mounting because her ex-husband was fighting everything. She had no income and no work history, and was drowning in debt. Mom and Dad were helping, but they were stretched thin. And given your successful career and good salary, we thought you might be willing to help your sister in her time of need. The specific request came in paragraph 7. Could I send $5,000 to help cover Ashley's lawyer retainer? And maybe consider ongoing support of $500 a month until she got back on her feet. Because that's what family does for each other. We support each other through hard times, and I know you understand that even if you're angry right now. I sat there staring at my laptop screen in my beautiful apartment that I paid for with money I earned myself, thinking about the audacity of asking me for $5,000 when they'd never once acknowledged my scholarship, or my competition win, or my graduation honors, or my job offer, never asked how I was doing, or whether I was happy, or what my life looked like now, only reached out when they needed something from me, specifically needed my money. And I felt something crystallize inside me that had been forming for months, this absolute clarity that I would never let them use me like this again. I didn't respond immediately, couldn't bring myself to engage with that email the night I received it, so I closed my laptop and spent the evening with Michael, who noticed I was distracted and quiet, but didn't push when I said I just needed to not think about something for a while. And the next morning, I had my regular therapy appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, who I'd started seeing in August after moving to California, weekly sessions where we'd been working through what she called complex family trauma, and I called unpacking why I spent my entire childhood feeling invisible. I brought the email to my session, read it aloud to Dr. Chen in her sunny office in Noe Valley, and she listened with that particular focused attention she had that made me feel actually heard. And when I finished, she asked me how I felt about the request, and I said honestly, I felt nothing. No anger or guilt or sympathy, just this exhausted recognition of a pattern repeating itself exactly as it always had. We spent the 50-minute session analyzing that pattern, Dr. Chen asking questions that helped me see what I already knew but needed to articulate. That in 23 years, my mother had never once contacted me to ask how I was doing, or celebrate an achievement, or simply tell me she was proud of me. That every single time she reached out, it was because she wanted something, needed something, expected me to provide something, whether that was my physical presence at family events I wasn't welcome at, or my emotional labor pretending everything was fine, or now my money to bail out the sister who'd treated me like garbage my entire life. I thought about my childhood room converted into a luxury dog suite with custom furniture and heated floors, while I slept on a 15-year-old mattress with springs poking through. Thought about my high school graduation that they missed for a vet appointment. Thought about my full-ride scholarship that Mom had dismissed with, "That's nice, dear," while spending $15,000 on Ashley's wedding where I wasn't even in the bridal party. Thought about my programming competition win and the $50,000 prize that they never acknowledged. Thought about my college graduation where they weren't welcome because they'd never actually supported anything I'd accomplished. Dr. Chen asked what I wanted to do about the email, and I said I wanted to respond, needed to respond actually, but I wanted to do it right, wanted to clearly articulate everything I'd been too young or too conditioned or too desperate for their approval to say before, and she helped me work through what that response might look like, not angry or vindictive, but honest and boundaried, laying out the reality of our relationship and what would need to change if there was going to be any relationship at all moving forward. I spent the next 2 days drafting that response in a notes document on my phone, writing and deleting and rewriting during my commute on the BART and my lunch breaks at TechCore and quiet evenings at home, getting the tone exactly right, making sure every word was true and measured and clear, building this careful structure of facts and feelings that couldn't be dismissed or reframed or turned back on me as proof of my supposed sensitivity. On Thursday evening, December 14th, I sat at my dining table with my laptop open and the notes document I'd been refining pulled up on one side of the screen and a new email composition window on the other, and I spent 20 minutes just staring at that blank space before I finally started typing, copying over the words I'd crafted so carefully over the past 2 days, shaping them into something that felt true and complete and final. The email I sent to my mother was exactly 832 words long, and it started with, "Mom, I received your request for $5,000 and your suggestion that I provide ongoing monthly support to Ashley. And before I address that specifically, I need you to understand why your email represents everything that's been wrong with our relationship my entire life. And from there, I laid it all out in careful chronological detail, every instance of being overlooked and dismissed that I'd been carrying for 23 years. I wrote about my high school graduation on June 4th, 4 years ago, that you missed because Ashley had a vet appointment for Bailey, not even an emergency, but a routine checkup that could have been rescheduled, and how I stood on that field in my cap and gown scanning the crowd for you, and instead saw Jordan's parents who barely knew me sitting there recording it because they felt sorry for me. I wrote about my full-ride scholarship to State University worth $120,000 that you acknowledged with, "That's nice, dear," while spending $15,000 on Ashley's wedding, where I wasn't included in the bridal party because Ashley said I wouldn't photograph well, and you agreed that was reasonable. I wrote about September of my freshman year, 2 months into college, when you called to tell me you'd converted my childhood bedroom into a luxury suite for Ashley's dog, complete with custom furniture and heated floors and a professional grooming station, spending what I later learned was nearly $8,000 on renovations for a golden retriever, while I'd spent my entire childhood sleeping on a 15-year-old mattress with broken springs because new furniture wasn't in the budget. I detailed my junior year programming competition win in March 2 years ago, a national collegiate competition where my team placed first, and I received a $10,000 share of the prize money, plus recognition that led directly to job offers from major tech companies, and how I posted about it once on social media and received congratulations from former teachers and distant acquaintances and complete strangers, but absolutely nothing from you or Ashley or anyone in our immediate family except Grandma. I wrote about my college graduation this past May, where I graduated summa cum laude with a computer science degree and a job offer starting at $95,000, and how when you called wanting to attend, I realized it wasn't because you were proud, but because you wanted to be seen as supportive parents at a public event, and how when I told you the tickets were going to people who'd actually supported me, Ashley called me a nerdy college kid, as if my education and career were somehow less valuable than her life choices. I explained that in the 7 months since graduation, through my cross-country move and starting my career and getting promoted to senior developer with a salary of $110,000, you had not once called to ask how I was doing or whether I was happy or what my life looked like or whether I was proud of what I'd accomplished, that the first and only time you contacted me was when you needed $5,000, and that this pattern of only valuing me when I could provide something for you or Ashley was exactly why I'd established distance in the first place. I wrote, "I have built a successful life and career without any support or encouragement from you, and I've learned that my worth isn't determined by whether my own mother recognizes it, and while that's a painful lesson, it's also been a liberating one." And then I laid out my terms clearly and without room for misinterpretation. I'm willing to work toward rebuilding some kind of relationship if you're genuinely willing to acknowledge how you've treated me, to take actual responsibility without deflecting or minimizing, and to demonstrate through consistent actions over time that you value me as a person and not just as a resource. But I will not send money to help Ashley or anyone else in the family, and I will not accept guilt trips or manipulation or attempts to paint my boundaries as cruelty. I ended with, "If you're not willing to do that work, then I wish you well, but I won't be participating in this family dynamic anymore because I've discovered I'm much happier and healthier without it." And I read through the entire email 3 times, checking for anything that felt cruel or unfair or untrue. Found nothing that wasn't simply honest. And at 8:47 p.m., I moved my cursor to the send button and clicked it before I could second-guess myself and watched the email disappear from my drafts into the sent folder, carrying with it 23 years of unspoken truth. Mom's response arrived in my inbox at 6:32 the next morning, the subject line reading "Disappointed and hurt," in that particular way she had of centering herself as the victim, and I read it over coffee in my kitchen while early light filtered through the windows of my apartment. And it was exactly what I'd expected. 8 paragraphs about how ungrateful I was, how she'd sacrificed everything raising me, how I was rewriting history and exaggerating minor things because I wanted to play the victim, how family meant forgiveness and I was being cruel and holding grudges, how she'd always loved both her daughters equally, and it wasn't her fault I was so sensitive and determined to take everything the wrong way. Ending with, "I guess I raised you better than you're showing right now." I felt nothing reading it, no anger or hurt or even disappointment, just this calm recognition that she was incapable of the self-reflection I'd asked for, and that was actually an answer in itself, a clear one. 20 minutes later, Ashley's message came through as a text. Not even worth an email, apparently. "Wow, Emma, so you're just going to abandon your family because you're rich now? Real classy. Don't come crying to us when your perfect life falls apart and you have nobody. We needed you, and you showed who you really are." I blocked her number immediately, didn't even finish reading it, and then I made myself a second cup of coffee and got ready for work. Went through my morning routine with this strange lightness in my chest, like I'd set down something heavy I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was weighing me down. But that evening, when I got home from Tech Corps, there was an email waiting from Dad, sent from his personal account instead of the family one. Subject line just, "Emma," and I almost deleted it without reading. But something made me open it, and his message was different from what I'd expected. "Emma, I read what you sent your mother, and I need you to know that you're right about all of it. Every single thing you listed, and I'm sorry I never protected you from how she treated you or stood up for you when Ashley was cruel or told you that I saw what was happening and that it was wrong. I took the easy path of keeping the peace instead of defending my daughter, and that's something I have to live with. I don't blame you for cutting contact, and I'm not asking you to forgive me or give us another chance if you don't want to. But I want you to know that I'm proud of everything you've accomplished, and I always have been even if I never said it. And if you're ever willing to talk just the two of us, I'd like that. But only if and when you're ready. Love, Dad." I read it 3 times sitting at my dining table, and I cried a little, which surprised me because I thought I'd processed all of this already. But apparently there was still some part of me that had needed to hear my father admit he'd failed me, that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated any of it. I didn't respond that night. Needed time to think about whether I wanted any relationship with him at all, but I didn't delete the email either, just marked it as unread and left it there to return to later. On Sunday, Grandma called, and I saw her name on my phone and answered immediately because she'd always been the one exception to the family toxicity, and she said, "Emma, honey, your father told me what's been happening, and I just want you to know I am so incredibly proud of you for standing up for yourself, and I'm sorry I didn't intervene more over the years because I saw how your mother treated you differently than Ashley and I should have said something directly instead of just trying to give you extra attention when I could." We talked for 40 minutes, her in Ohio and me in California, and she told me stories about my father's childhood that helped me understand how he'd learned to avoid conflict, and she asked about my job and my apartment and Michael and actually listened to my answers. And before we hung up, she said, "You don't owe them anything, Emma. You really don't. And sometimes the family we choose is more real than the family we're born into." That week, I went to work and came home to Michael and had dinner with my friends from Tech Corps and went to my therapy appointment, where Dr. Chen and I processed the responses. And the weekend after that, Jordan flew out to visit me, and we spent 2 days exploring San Francisco together. And she told me she'd been watching my journey since freshman year, and seeing me finally free of that family dynamic was like watching someone step out of a cage they'd been living in so long they'd forgotten what open air felt like. In the weeks that followed, I gradually built this understanding that I'd done what I needed to do, set the boundaries that should have existed all along, and whatever happened next was their choice, not mine. And I realized sitting in my apartment one evening in early January, city lights visible through my windows and my entire future stretching out ahead of me, that I didn't need their approval or their acknowledgement or their validation because I'd built something real and true without any of it, and whether they chose to do the work to have a relationship with me or not, I was going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. I was going to keep thriving exactly as I'd been doing, surrounded by people who valued me for who I actually was, rather than what I could provide them. And that wasn't just enough. It was everything I'd needed all along and never received from them, and now I'd learned to give it to myself and find it in the people who'd proven they deserved a place in my life, and that was its own kind of freedom, complete and permanent and mine.